We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And you're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. We're continuing our conversation with Liberty Nation senior political analyst Tim Donner. Now, we've run the gamut on the Democratic Party. We've talked about leadership. We've talked about lessons that need to be learned. But I think the people or the group that really needs to learn some lessons are the pollster group and the legacy media group. Because, let's be fair, they're just not getting it right.
Well, I'm sure they feel, though, that once Donald Trump is gone and you have a more conventional candidate like someone like a Nikki Haley in 2028, that they'll be able to get
I'm calling it now. I think J.D. Vance becomes the nominee.
Well, that's that is certainly in the cards. But you've got to remember that Trump is going to really shake things up this time. He's going to really drain the swamp. He's going to try and get rid of thousands of federal unaccountable bureaucrats, which really define the swamp. A permanent bureaucracy unaccountable to anybody and distant from the American people. As far as elite media goes, I think we can say rest in peace, because this is the end of them. They fail to recognize that the American people recognize just how much they put their thumb, really their whole body on the scale to get first Joe Biden elected and then Kamala Harris. I mean, it was so palpable. But what they seem to. Can I
just interrupt you on that one? This thing's really important to bring up. You were watching the MSNBC as well throughout the election night. And I was there in the wee small hours, listening to every word, following all my sources, updating our amazing coverage on libertynation.com. And it devolved, the MSNBC panel. They started talking about, we are losing. We have lost. They used the word we to describe Kamala Harris's campaign.
The first honest thing they've said most of the campaign.
Exactly right. So when Kamala Harris lost, they lost. Because what Kamala Harris was selling, the public didn't buy. And therefore, when the media were saying, we are losing, they've lost too. And I don't see how they can realistically come back from a line.
They're never going to recover from this. So, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. pointed out that when he was growing up, and he specifically said the time of when his uncle John F. Kennedy was president, media credibility among the American people was in the upper 80s. Mm. Over 80% of Americans trusted the media. That number is now down to about 30%. You could only describe that as a crash and burn. And part of it, of course, is the fact that TV broadcast outlets and newspapers like the Washington Post and the New York Times have become far less influential in the era of social media, where podcasts are now king, not, the 600,000 people who watch CNN every night. That ship has sailed, and the sooner they recognize it, the better off they'll be. And the only way to recognize it and try to correct it is to start reporting objectively on the upcoming Trump administration. Do I expect that to happen? Absolutely not. But just like the Democratic Party, if they want to spend the next 4 years ginning up scandals about Trump, supporting impeachment efforts, and the like, and all the things, or even trying to indict the sitting president when Donald Trump enters the Oval Office again, that trend is only going to continue. And I think it's a totally different media environment now. And these broadcast networks have contributed to their own demise by so blatantly favoring the left and trashing the right. And people aren't stupid. They can see it.
they've created and consigned themselves to their very own purgatory.
Yes.
From which there is return. That's the funny thing. That's the thing about purgatory, right? That's not eternity. That is, you can go one way or the other after there, and they can do a comeback. And as you say, the solution to it is so simple. It's to tell the truth, to report.
But the problem is that these people actually believe what they're saying. The media is so dominated by liberals. Take Fox News apart, and you can barely find anyone who isn't nakedly left-wing. And they don't think they are. I think that's the problem. There's no self-awareness in elite media about how they appear to the general public. They're in complete denial. Now, we'll see if they head to a more reasonable direction. I would not hold your breath.
Yeah, there's a fact. Now, let's talk about the from pundits to pollsters. And I would like to give myself a pat on the back. And you listeners out there, if you'd like to congratulate me on this, please do so by heading over to libertynation.com and reading our fantastic coverage on all things constitutional. But Tim, as you know, I put together in the 3 weeks running up to the election, every day I put together a collection of polling and betting odds. And I used a slightly different method to most people, most outlets when it came to parsing the swing state polling. And that was, well, you can check it out on the page of libertynation.com, but essentially I used only the most recent ones rather than taking a spread of pollsters over a period of time, so I could really catch the zeitgeist of it. And the final set of 7 battleground polls that I had on Liberty Nation, I said that 6 would go to Donald Trump and 1 would go what was on a knife edge, really. And that's basically came to pass. And so somehow libertynation.com, under the wonderful stewardship of Tim Donner and Lisa K. Donner, actually became one of the most accurate predictors for the 2024 election. How did everybody else get it so wrong?
Well, I think people tend to ignore history, which means they're bound to repeat it. And several times during the election campaign, I pointed out that the circumstances of this election were very similar to 1980, when I will point out that the Washington Post's last poll in 1980 had Jimmy Carter winning by 4 points. He lost by 10, and Ronald Reagan swept 44 states. And the circumstances were very similar. Inflation had jacked up the cost of living to unsustainable levels. You had foreign policy disasters in that case, the Iran hostage crisis, and a general sense of weakness in foreign policy. America had lost respect around the world. There was cultural decline. And in almost every aspect, the groundwork of 1980 was the same as in 2024, when people were absolutely disgusted with the performance of the sitting administration. And yet, right to the end, Carter and Reagan appeared to be tied. And that's the same thing we got from gun-shy pollsters this year who kept saying, too close to call, on a razor's edge, could go either way. And a lot of that was just a plain fear of being wrong again. Well, by not really accurately being able to poll the electorate, they dug their own grave again. But I guarantee you, Mark, in 4 years, people will have forgotten, and they'll start obsessing over these same polls again. Instead of looking at the facts on the ground, the general dissatisfaction of the American people. Party registration was something that everybody overlooked. The Republicans had a registration advantage this year for the first time in memory, certainly the first time in this century. all of these things, including a wildly unpopular incumbent, all these things contributed to what I increasingly felt was an inevitable outcome, which would be a decisive victory, if not a landslide, for Donald Trump. And I put it in writing so that people couldn't say, I'm a Monday morning quarterback. But the signs to me were clear. As someone who studied, obsessed, watched, listened about politics for most of my life.
That's the thing everybody forgets. The map is not the territory. We'll be back with Tim Donner after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.